September 12, 1943.
In 1943, 16 German paratroopers landed in England. In 3 days, they almost won the war. That was the tagline for the American one-sheet poster for The Eagle Has Landed, which was based on the international bestseller by Jack Higgins. And I'm Steve Mitchell, screenwriter, historian, and filmmaker, and I'm here with my good friend, Stephen J. Rubin, also a screenwriter, historian, filmmaker, and author of combat films American Realism 1945 to 2010. Steve, it's good to be with you again.
As always, a lot of fun, Steve. Glad to be here.
Now, for war movie fans and fans of the Alistair MacLean World War II adventure Where Eagles Dare, this main title sequence is somewhat reminiscent, let's say, of that film's opening title sequence. I have no problem with this. It's really scenic. It also gives us an opportunity to hear theme music by the great Lalo Schifrin, who contributed a really, really good score to this film. Schifrin was someone who specialized, for the most part, in doing music that had a suspense factor. And so Schifrin was really good casting musically, and we'll talk about Schifrin a little bit later on. In case you haven't noticed, this movie has got a hell of a cast. I mean, Treat Williams all the way buried down towards the back. And this was an international production with the international market in mind. It was cast with American names, British names, German names, because Lou Grade, Lord Lou Grade of ITC, decided to get into the movie business, and he was financing his own pictures. And in point of fact, the novel, the Jack Higgins novel, basically came out the year before this picture was released. Now, I'm not entirely sure if the timeline is that this picture went into production immediately, but it was released fairly soon after the bestseller had sort of captured the imagination of audiences around the world. And this is also John Sturges' last picture. And I'm a big fan of John Sturges, and we will talk in some detail about Sturges directing this film and also some of his other pictures. Steve, do you remember when you saw this for the first time? Did you see it in a theater, or was this a TV experience for you?
I definitely think this was a theater experience. I had interviewed John Sturges 2 years earlier when I was writing my book. I did a chapter on The Great Escape, which of course was his masterpiece. I believe it's sitting in his office. I didn't see The Eagle Has Landed on his desk, but I certainly saw a book called The Boat, which later became Das Boot. So I think he was being considered to direct that movie when it was going to be more of an American production. When I was doing the editing on my book, I sent him the chapter, and he sent me back a letter on The Eagle Has Landed stationery, which I thought was pretty cool.
Very cool.
Yeah, so he was in the thick of it. And we'll talk later about Sturges, but I just thought he was a perfect choice to direct this movie. He was always very comfortable in directing war pictures and action pictures, and this certainly qualifies as both.
One of the things that we'll probably point out a lot during the course of the next couple of hours is Sturges' craft. He was not only a great director, but he was a great storyteller. You know, again, if you'd seen The Great Escape and you've seen The Magnificent Seven and so many of his other movies, the storytelling quality in his work is consistent throughout his career. But right now, let's talk about what's on the screen. We have Robert Duvall playing a German officer, which to me was very surprising at the time. When I read the book, Oberst Radl, the character he plays, I didn't have anyone in mind when I was reading the book, least of which Robert Duvall. And then Admiral Canaris is played by the great Anthony Quayle, who was in Guns of Navarone. And kind of continuing the Alistair MacLean movie tradition, Alistair MacLean was the go-to best-selling author, especially in the 60s, of so many great novels, The Guns of Navarone, Where Eagles Dare, as we talked about, When Eight Bells Toll. and so many others. And the whole sort of subgenre of the historical wartime adventure movie was kind of his ball game. And Jack Higgins wound up sort of taking the mantle from McClane. And Higgins was a great author and storyteller in his own right. And as a young boy and a young teenager, I gobbled these things up. They were like reading movies, and a lot of people must have agreed, because so many of McClane's books were turned into movies, and quite a few of Higgins as well. This, to me, is really the best of the bunch. Again, Duvall is so American, yet in this movie, he is so German. It's interesting, the way he carries himself and his mannerisms. He has a subtle accent, but he's not really trying to hammer it. It's not cliche. And
I also think the eye patch does a lot for his character. He's kind of doing that von Stauffenberg look, which of course we now associate with Tom Cruise from his World War II movie. Duvall has evolved as one of our great actors.
And he was fundamentally, and I would say instinctually, a character guy. Right. He could get lost in a part. And I think that he did a wonderful job, considering this should have been played by a European actor. But look at the gesture, the way he sort of feels the map, the sort of need to get sort of almost tactile. He's putting his hands on the mission. And I think that in the book, he's written as a little bit more of a hardliner. And in the movie, he really is a bit more sympathetic. He's been wounded in combat. He is kind of physically a broken man. They don't go into it very deeply in the film, but in the novel, we basically understand that he knows that he's running out of time. So he smokes these horrible Russian cigarettes, which are probably 10 times stronger than French Gauloise cigarettes. I know that when I used to smoke 100 years ago, the first Gauloise cigarette I had provoked the same reaction that it does with Donald Sutherland a little later here in the story. And
does it say in the book where he was wounded?
Well, I think his arm is pretty much kind of dead. And clearly he's wearing the eye patch because he probably took something. But they didn't make a big deal out of it in the book. Or if they did, it went by so fast I didn't quite catch it. But the thing is, he's drinking brandy all the time and smoking because, why not do the things you enjoy, knowing that your time is short? But, just the behavior that Duvall brings to this character, to me, is interesting to watch because it's so different from any other Duvall performance. By the way, the guy over there with him is an actor, British character actor named Michael Byrne, who, if you've watched movies, and you watch movies that are shot in England and television, he worked all the time. I believe he's in The Empire Strikes Back.
Isn't he also the main German in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade?
Yeah, he is. He's one of those Germans, and he has the very blonde Aryan kind of look to him, but he's also a very good character guy. And what's nice about this sequence to me, and the book kind of parallels it. One of the things about the book is the book and the movie are very close in terms of the story. I recently read The Secret Ways, which was a McClane novel, and saw the film, and it couldn't have been more different. One of the things I liked about this movie so much at the time was it was very faithful to the source material. This is one of those books where you go, this is just a great idea. But again, look at Duvall. It's happening for him. It is becoming a reality. The whole idea of this was sort of a joke. The whole idea of this was, let's just look into it and do a feasibility study and see if this is possible. And now you have Duvall, who is a very dedicated man, an intelligent man. He talks about the works of Jung, I think his assistant says, I'm aware of the works of Young, but I don't know the works of Young. And Duvall says, oh, he was such a great thinker. And to me, that helped solidify who Duvall was, a thinker. And now we are in Finland, which is where they shot all of this stuff. It's supposed to be Poland, by the way.
By the way, there is a certain historical validity to the fact that the Tehran Conference, which was held in Tehran in 1943, where Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt were first meeting, there was a plot to take out the three leaders. German intelligence knew where it was taking place, and it was foiled. The American intelligence and British intelligence foiled a potential plot to take out the three leaders. So the idea of taking out Churchill is not as far-fetched as you think.
Not at all. Not at all. Again, one of the things that's nice about watching a movie like this that was made, my God, back in the 70s, which is a long time ago, is trains like this and equipment like this still existed. It didn't have to be created through miniatures. And of course, CGI was not a factor back in the day. I think this is a nice way to introduce Michael Caine. And Michael Caine apparently was offered the role of Devlin, the part that was eventually played by Donald Sutherland. And Caine didn't want to play an IRA guy because of all of the issues that the British and the Irish had back in the day.
I also found it interesting that we learned from the research that Michael Caine turned down, I assume, the Richard Burton role in Where Eagles Dare.
Yeah, that was interesting to find out. I personally think that they got lucky and that they got Burton, and Burton is having the time of his life in that picture. But one of the things that's so effective about this film is you have to be rooting for the protagonists. And the protagonists in this movie are essentially the Germans and the IRA character, Devlin. They would be villains in any other picture.
Well, I think casting Caine as Steiner was a bold stroke and a very smart stroke. And getting back to Sturges was always known for his casting decisions and almost flawless casting across the board. And I'm sure he was very involved in the casting in this. By the way, this sequence where the Steiner's group somewhat rescues this Jewish girl was one of my favorite scenes in the book. I thought the book was pretty cool in depicting this scene.
Well, I think the whole point of this scene is to show the difference between German soldiers and the SS. That German soldiers and the SS are really cut from different cloth, even though they wear similar uniforms and they fight for the same country. And also, this scene goes a long way to make Caine somewhat more sympathetic. That's sort of a trick that they had to figure out. How do you get the audience on the side of the Germans who are out to kill Churchill? And this scene goes a long way to do that. And by the way, I recently read that German soldiers would wear their medals even in combat. American soldiers did not wear their medals, but German soldiers did, which I thought was interesting. Now, in a way, it works as something in addition to rank. It shows accomplishment, and it tells you about bravery, which was a key component, I believe, for the German army. Again,
by the way, Steve, did you recognize this officer here? He looked very familiar to me.
He is a German character actor, and he is I think he is named, I'm going to mess it up, Joachim Hansen or Hansen.
Oh, okay.
But again, if you watch movies, British films primarily, or European pictures primarily from that period, he's one of those, oh, that guy kind of character actors.
It is interesting that, you know, basically Steiner's talking to a German general, which of course you don't talk to this way. So I know.
Look, he's lipping off. He's not talking.
He's yeah, and it's funny because he's basically writing his own death sentence. They don't really. I got the impression that this was not something that Sturges wanted to focus on, but in the book, don't they? His whole unit is now under severe court-martial, and they're turned into human torpedoes. Is that what they're supposed to do?
Yeah, we will get to that. But by lipping off to this general, even though the general recognizes that Steiner is a war hero, you know, he and his men are basically conspiring by saving that Polish girl, and they're all sort of doomed. And we kind of go into that, and they go into a bit more detail. Everything about the book has more detail, and it has some subplots which were eliminated, which I'll talk about a little bit later on.
But Caine is just so terrific. I totally believe him as a German here, and very commanding presence.
He has a certain European kind of bearing, which is nice. And the other actor, Hans, that Caine talks to, is basically his right-hand man, is this Swedish actor Sven Bertil Taube, who was the star of the Alistair MacLean movie, Puppet on a Chain. And he's a very handsome guy, and he has a certain amount of camera presence, but you know, it's a little hard to tell how good an actor he is because he doesn't have very many lines in this movie, and he doesn't have very many lines in Puppet on a Chain. But yet he had a career which lasted decades.
And he was a singer as well.
Well, there you go. So he was a multitasker.
But they didn't give him a song like they gave Trini Lopez. Was it Trini Lopez?
What, the Dirty Dozen?
Yeah, Trini Lopez got a song in the Dirty Dozen, but Sven didn't get a song.
Well, I don't know that it would have made any difference except perhaps in Sweden. But in any case, you know, one of the things that I just want to point out, and I'll do this probably throughout the track, is the quality of the production design, art direction, and set decoration. And the production was designed by Peter Merton, who, Steve, as you know, had worked on many Bond pictures. Again, the British film business was a bit more compact, and you would see a lot of players who worked behind the camera as well as in front of the camera, working on a number of other films. And again, this is probably a set, most likely, but it plays like a real place. I mean, I like the disarray you see in the background. And,
you know, it should be pointed out that Anthony Quayle, who, by the way, always looked good in uniform. It was almost like he was born to wear some kind of uniform, whether it's Lawrence of Arabia or the Guns of Navarone. I think he was even in Masada. I think he was even a soldier in Masada. But he's playing Admiral Canaris, and I believe
a real character.
Real character in military history. Admiral Canaris, I believe, was the head of the German Abwehr, which was the German military intelligence. And as I recall, Canaris did not necessarily agree with all of Hitler's policies, and I think he eventually paid for that attitude. But here he's playing in cynical form. Quayle was just one of those actors who just brought it. I always liked his work.
He has great authority. And again, I've talked about this with you in other commentaries about the quality. I like the frustration that Duvall has here, just waving the hands and everything, I think is a great choice. But, you know, that there's so many actors who bring so much with them once they just step in front of a lens. Even Michael Byrne here, who was never a star in England, brings a certain amount of authority. Now, here is Donald Sutherland, who in the book is nothing like the Liam Devlin that we see in this picture. Devlin is introduced as kind of a charming, somewhat handsome, romantic type of lead, and in the book, he still has a lot of charm, but he is, as Higgins said, he is short and dark. He wasn't this. There's a great line that Sutherland has here. He says, "Don't you know, Colonel, I'm the last of the great adventurers." And Sutherland kind of has that quality and bearing in his performance. So again, Duvall just had a nice little bit of, business where he just sort of waved his hand. I mean, this whole performance by Duvall is really nicely observed. Now, Sutherland is wearing a hairpiece to make him, I guess, look a bit more Irish because they gave him red hair. But Sutherland was a member, not Sutherland, but the character of Liam Devlin was a member of the IRA who was working for the Germans during the war. For those of you who are younger than us and might not remember that the IRA was always, and probably to this day, still somewhat at war with the Brits. And Devlin's character said that, his true enemy is the Irish. It's not the Irish. He was Irish. That were the Brits. And so working with the Germans facilitated that goal. I love all these choices that Duvall comes up with. They're so not American. And it's interesting, usually when you see movies like this, you go, okay, enough with the planning and enough with the talking. Let's go and get the mission happening. And I actually find this part of the picture very, very interesting.
There's a lot of time involved here in planning, which I think helps you really understand the stakes involved. And Sutherland, I think we have in play here some of the great character performers in all world cinema. I mean, Sutherland, of course, was no stranger to World War II movies. 9 years earlier, he did The Dirty Dozen, which was his breakout.
That was his breakout, yeah.
Definitely. And then 3 years after that, he did Kelly's Heroes, playing Oddball, which is one of my favorite characters of his.
Probably the most bizarre character in a World War II picture.
No, absolutely. And then, of course, Sutherland is ubiquitous. He's always around playing either father figures or malevolent figures. He's such a strong presence in the Hunger Games series. But I remember, I think one of the first times I saw him was in The Dirty Dozen, but he's all over the place. He's in Animal House. He plays that pot smoking school teacher in Animal House, and
right.
I think that was when he was on camera with his pants off. I remember that.
It's funny. You say Donald Sutherland and Animal House, and I think of him without his pants on. The mind is a funny thing. But Sutherland was Canadian by birth, but wound up going to England where he could play Americans when necessary. By the way, we need to focus on Donald Pleasence right now. By the way, look at that composition. Look at what that simple piece of classic composition does to tell you about who Himmler was. Also, Duvall's performance, kind of a little nervous and respectful. The stillness that Pleasence brings to this part, the preciseness of his movements, the organization of his desk, all of these things, these little things really create so much depth and so much detail very quickly and efficiently. Even when Himmler there is trying to tell a joke, which he sort of half laughs at, but he doesn't think it's funny.
Of course, this was a reunion for Sturges and Pleasence because they worked so beautifully together on The Great Escape, which in many ways was the picture that brought him to the attention of American audiences, although about the same period, he had been in a great episode of The Twilight Zone. In fact, I believe it was the start of, I think, the third season or the end of the third season. Anyway, The Changing of the Guard was a wonderful classic Twilight Zone episode, which I researched when I wrote my book, The Twilight Zone Encyclopedia. Donald has always been one of my favorite character actors and beloved by many.
And employed by even more. One of my favorite Pleasence performances, he was the villain in an episode of Columbo, which had to do with a bottle of wine that was priceless. And one of the things that was so nice about that episode is, ultimately Columbo caught Pleasence, or the character, but there was a certain affection that Columbo showed towards him. And Pleasence gives this wonderful, very low-key and somewhat charming performance. He wasn't a charmer per se, but you could see why Columbo came to like him, even though he had to arrest him. Also, the other thing is, this is going to be a little strange, but growing up, my dad always used to point out when people would wear hair pieces, and so Pleasence is wearing a hairpiece right now, which was very unusual for him. A lot of actors who have a highly receding hairline, not unlike Duvall. Duvall didn't wear a lot of hairpieces, nor did Pleasence.
Well, it has to be one of the more subtle hairpieces of all time. There's not much hair there.
Of course, but he looks a great deal like Himmler actually looked. And again, a nice touch. I like all of these leather binders, if you will, on his desk, that, he's the illusion of a classy, look at that expression, the power in the stillness that Pleasence brings to the role, and a certain amount of narcissism and ego that he's sort of put this plan into motion, seems to make him as happy as this character could ever get. Now, let me just digress for a second. In the book, Pleasence is a lot more involved in the story than he is in the film. And I'll just say that one of the things that's interesting about the movie is they've kind of telescoped the book in a great way. In the way Jaws, the feature, was about three guys and a shark, the spine of this movie is the mission. And all of the stuff in the novel, which brought great texture and detail, has been minimized, if not eliminated. And we'll talk about that during the course of the track.
I think this is the captured British PT-boat, which apparently, according to IMDb, was a very famous boat. This is not just another boat that they refurbished for the movie. This boat was originally utilized at the evacuation of Dunkirk. And I thought that was kind of interesting to know. There was a story. This plane, although it's a high-wing plane, kind of reminded me a little bit of the plane in The Great Escape. And this gentleman there on the left, if I'm not mistaken, is Till Kui, who played one of the ferrets in The Great Escape.
It was a smaller movie business.
And of course, Sturges knew him from The Great Escape, so obviously he cast him in that. I'm sure he had lots of access to German actors based on the success of that earlier film.
Yeah, it's again, the war film genre, which pretty much doesn't exist today. There are a lot of actors and players who you would see go from picture to picture to picture. There's a German actor named Carl Otto Alberti that both Steve and I were surprised was not in this picture, because he was in virtually every other major war film in the 1960s. Again, one of the things that's so great about this picture is the locations and the sense of place and time. Now, my understanding is that all of this stuff, which is supposed to be the Channel Islands, was actually shot in England around the coast of Cornwall. But again, very few people know these places. I mean, as much as I'd someday love to go to the Channel Islands, I don't know them. But again, it has that great period feel. The light, the grayness, all goes to creating sort of a very credible impression of the world and the war at the time.
Well, when we get to England and, of course, all of the action stuff around the main part of the kidnapping plot, I just love the way Sturges used the location. I think there are certain directors who know how to maneuver their cast in a certain way that makes it compelling. And I think that that's very true of this movie, that he makes very strong use of his locations and unique locations. And I found that to be part of the aspect of the show that I really liked.
Well, I'm sure it's not fun to live near this great body of water, but on film, it looks fantastic. And one of the things I want to point out, in addition to the quality of the compositions in the movie, Sturges is a director who rarely uses long lenses. And for those of you who don't know much about film cameras or lenses, you use a long lens when you want to cheat the room or the location, or when you want to have a shot that's kind of intimate where you don't see the background. Either the background is very soft focus or sometimes so soft focus that it's almost like colors and shapes. One of the things that Sturges almost never does is cheat. He shows you the room. You are always oriented as to where things are taking place. And this goes to the whole idea of him being a crafted storyteller. And if you know his movies, whether you're watching his Westerns or you're watching his war films or any of his pictures, the sense of place is important. Now, these torpedoes, again, it's a nice piece of set dressing and decoration. Part of the punishment that this unit of, is it Fallschirmjägers, Steve, the paratrooper? Is that what they call them in German?
Yeah, Fallschirmjägers, exactly.
Right. Okay, I didn't screw that one up too badly. They have to ride these torpedoes into Allied shipping. And the whole idea, and they talk about this in the book at some length. In fact, this whole sequence where they go to the Channel Islands and recruit Steiner and his men is a much more elaborate piece of story and storytelling. In point of fact, there is a character in the book who is a major general, and this major general is Steiner's father. And basically, they say Steiner's father has been accused of treason, that Himmler arrested him for suspicion of treason. And one of the major motivations for Steiner to take this assignment is to get better treatment and perhaps to save his father. And Mankiewicz and Sturges really don't bring up that subplot because, in essence, it takes away from the inertia of the story. In fact, most of the changes from the book are basically to streamline the story and the storytelling. In fact, a great portion of the book is designed to give us the experience of the training. And once Steiner presents this to his men, as he says, things really kind of amp up and continue to move along quite fast.
By the way, those two bodies that they carry over into their truck, do you think those were British sailors they got off of that boat after they captured it?
Oh, no, not at all. They were a couple of the paratroopers who were killed, and they brought their bodies back for burial.
Okay, got it.
One of the things also about the Mankiewicz screenplay is that there are many moments in the course of the script where dialogue from Higgins' novel is used in the screenplay. I mean, Mankiewicz was wise to, use the good stuff. And again, Steiner is looking to save his men or to allow them a chance to die as soldiers, not as sacrificial lambs, so to speak. And that's enough really for the movie, I think. In the book, it's kind of great, but, it's not really that necessary. The other thing that's interesting here is that this sequence, which is again in Alderney, which is one of the Channel Islands, was filmed at a place called Charlestown, and it's near somewhere called St. Austell in Cornwall, which is a coastal area of England. And again, part of what makes all these movies interesting to me, as most of my friends know, I'm sort of locations crazy. But again, this goes to the credibility of the storytelling. And the story and the fact that this is happening in the real world makes the outlandishness of the plot seem very acceptable.
Very true.
And I like I like the fact that he is a very loyal leader. He says, I will put that to my men, I think is the line. You know, and here Radl is talking about the idea of a negotiated peace, which is not something that was in the book. In fact, Radl in the book is a little bit more of a fanatic. The whole idea here is to take, essentially, again, as we said before, the enemy, and show that at least the fanatics are somewhat more civilized and have some sort of handle on where Germany was going in the war. And the whole idea was that they've lost it. By the way, this guy over here with the blood on his collar is a German actor named Siegfried Rausch, who was, I think, a leading man in Germany. I also knew him as the sergeant, the German sergeant in Sam Fuller's The Big Red One, kind of Lee Marvin's opposite number, and they ultimately they come into contact with one another. But you know, Rausch has got kind of these sort of matinee idol looks and piercing blue eyes.
Isn't he also the German historian in Patton?
Yes, he is. Yes, he is.
Sure.
And he's one of those German actors who managed to work beyond Germany. His English, of course, is very good. And this is a great bit. There we go. Which was not in the book. Again, one of the things that was nice about what Mankiewicz did, I love that slap that, you know, Duvall does. All of his behavior is so keenly observed. But one of the things that Mankiewicz did, I'm sure with Sturges' urging, is to take what's really good about the book and then remember that we're making a film. And that's such a great statement, just having Devlin thrown out that window.
He's got in there, Colonel.
I love Duvall's amusement with the whole thing.
These Fallschirmjägers are no nonsense German soldiers.
They're tough guys. I mean, especially this unit, because this unit served in Russia. And in the book, they talk about being wounded. And for some reason, even when you're wounded, but you're in combat, you somehow can find the strength to walk a mile, even if you're wounded in the leg. In fact, the character that Sven Bertil Taub plays is known as Hans Ritter von Neustadt in the film. In the book, he was known as Ritter Neumann or Neumann. Again, same basic job. He was the number 2 and second in command. But as we will find out later, he gets wounded. But Steiner references a previous wound in combat, and it never stopped. It never stopped von Neustadt or Neumann in the book from surviving. Again, nice piece of cinematic shorthand. You see these two guys in their uniforms, looking kind of resplendent too. I mean, the Germans had, I don't want to go out on a limb and say I'm a Nazi lover, but at least their tailors, you know, did really nice work. And these guys were, you know, very striking.
Says, I realized fear one morning.
We should talk a little bit about Tom Mankiewicz.
Sure. Let's talk about Tom Mankiewicz, one of, you know, a member of the clan Mankiewicz, one of the great Hollywood families of all time.
The truth be known, Colonel.
Yes, his father was Herman Mankiewicz, who of course wrote Citizen Kane, and his uncle was Joe Mankiewicz, who directed Cleopatra. I've interviewed him several times for my various books on the James Bond movies, but Tom came to the James Bond movies on Diamonds Are Forever. He collaborated with Richard Maybaum, and they shared story credit on that film. And then, of course,
had he been writing beforehand, or was that was one of his first real noticeable assignments?
I think, as I recall, I think he wrote Georgie Girl. I think was one of his first assignments. I believe a film like that, and he came to the attention of the Bond people. I think Maybaum had to go somewhere or took on another assignment, so the Diamonds Are Forever script needed somebody. And what happens with Diamonds, and then of course with the early Roger Moore films, both of which Tom worked on, Live and Let Die and The Man with the Golden Gun, was a certain wit. Tom was a very learned screenwriter, very much a man with a very strong command of the words in dialogue. And I think what happened when Roger Moore took on the Bond mantle, he was known more of as James Bond light, and the comedy became more prevalent in the Bond movies, and this was perfectly in tune with what Tom brought to it. Tom had also worked on the Richard Donner Superman movies, uncredited, and brought a certain wit to the Lex Luthor character. And it's interesting because The Eagle Has Landed is completely different from any of his other work. His
first screenplay was a picture called The Sweet Ride, which he did before Diamonds in '68. And because, let's face it, if you're a Mankiewicz, that's Hollywood royalty. And I think that helped him. But to his credit, he managed to be very successful on his own. He also did Mother Jugs and Speed, which is a very bizarre but interesting kind of dramedy. And for ITC, he did the screenplay for the Cassandra Crossing right around the time ITC was doing The Eagle Has Landed. Again, just a very nice piece of storytelling here from Sturges. Just to interrupt you for a second, to give context to the fact that Devlin is now in England, which is pretty obvious from the architecture and the greenery. But, Mankiewicz is a guy who was busy during the 70s into the 80s. He also directed and had a pretty decent career, I think.
Oh, yes. And I actually got a chance to work with him. He directed a movie for Showtime. I went up to Toronto, a movie called Taking the Heat, which was with Tony Goldwyn and Alan Arkin, and I got to spend some time with Tom. Very sharp guy, he kind of reminded me a little bit of Sterling Silliphant, a guy who was very comfortable in his own skin, who wrote many different types of movies, and was certainly a plum for this one. And given the great source material from Jack Higgins, I think it was a good match.
I agree. And I also agree with Mankiewicz, who I believe I said before, he thought this was his best script. And I will agree with that. By the way, this whole thing with the high-pitched whistle, which is a useful storytelling device for later on, was created for the film. That's Jean Marsh playing Mrs. Gray. And in the book, Mrs. Gray is a Boer. She is from South Africa. And she married someone who was British, and that brought her to England, but she was not English. Now, Jean Marsh, who was very famous for being in the British primetime sort of soap opera or drama, Upstairs, Downstairs.
Not only was she in it, I think she co-created it.
Yeah, she did. You're absolutely right. And the thing is that Jean Marsh almost always plays frumps. And I remember once seeing her, I think, at a premiere or on a talk show or something like that. And she was very glamorous and very attractive. And she was very effervescent and she was smiling. And I said, wow, that's Jean Marsh, because Jean Marsh is also in Hitchcock's Frenzy, playing the extremely uptight receptionist at the employment agency. And it's interesting that they gave her this part, but of course it doesn't surprise me because Upstairs, Downstairs was an international hit. And again, she is known to the audience, and the audience probably took some pleasure seeing her in this part. But Mrs. Gray in the book is literally that. She's gray or white-haired, and she is a much older woman who is working for the Germans, spying for the Germans. And but I like Jean Marsh. I think she makes an awful lot more of this part than really is written. and here is Jenny Agutter. And, you know, Steve, you and I have talked about this before, that the whole romance which blossoms between the two of them, I think some people think is the weak link of the picture. How do you feel, Steve, about it more specifically?
Well, in reading about some of the scenes that didn't end up in the final cut by Ann Coates, I'm beginning to think that the relationship had a little bit more of a early development that we don't see. I mean, apparently there was a scene where Donald Sutherland is reading poetry to her that certainly didn't end up in the final cut. It seems that boom, 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 they're already kissing. So, you know, they say that things happen differently in wartime. Obviously, this is a very quick love at first sight romance.
Now, in the many bad reviews this picture got back in the day, everybody was quick to point out the sort of lack of credibility of the relationship between Sutherland and the character of Molly Pryor. But in America, the version that we saw, Steve, theatrically was about 10 minutes shorter than the version we're looking at this evening. We're recording this in the evening. And I personally like the longer version of this story. It sort of fills things out a little bit. But again, after having reread the book spends a lot of time on this relationship. It spends a lot of time establishing, you know, how sort of smitten Molly was, you know, with Devlin. And in the movie, I mean, Sutherland is he's got movie star charm, for example. And you go, wow, how could something like this happen? But in the 40s, in a very small village like Studley Constable, he shows up on a motorcycle, he's carrying a shotgun, he almost looks like somebody from a novel. And so I did not hate this relationship as much as some people did. Certainly the critical community did. But I think it's maybe one of the weaker links in the story.
Jenny has a lot of charisma, and I think
she's charming and beautiful.
Charming. I think we had both discovered her the year before in Logan's Run, playing the female lead opposite Michael York. And I remember making a note, who is this young lady? And I liked Jenny, and I thought, you know, she's very good. You know, she does have some, you know, charisma with him. There is a certain.
Yeah, they have chemistry, and also let's not forget she was the female lead in John Landis's American Werewolf in London. Again, you know, maybe one of the great werewolf love stories, and she's really great in that. And that's John Standing playing Father Vereker between Donald Sutherland and Judy Geeson. And of course, that's Judy Geeson, who, again, if you watch British movies, especially in the 70s, she would almost always be the lead or the second lead in a lot of pictures. In the book, Vereker has a limp because he had been in the paratroopers. He had been a padre with a paratrooper unit and got wounded. And that whole backstory of him having a military background was perhaps wisely not focused on too much in the movie, because at this point, things are accelerating. And one of the things about the novel is that Higgins talked about going on trial runs, doing some parachute drops just to get used to low-level drops. You know, they went into great detail about this. Essentially, this is you know, a Douglas DC-3, and this was kind of the workhorse airplane of the American and the British armies. I mean, if you watch any picture where there are a lot of paratroops in them, and you have footage of paratroopers jumping out that door, you're usually looking at this plane, which was also known as a C-47. And in fact, it was such a popular plane that it was even used in Vietnam, but instead of carrying men and supplies, or paratroopers and supplies. It would have a Gatling gun in it, and it would hover over the Vietnamese and just rain down thousands of rounds on the Viet Cong. So while it was essentially a transport plane, it's also the plane that is really kind of famous if you've ever seen the Howard Hawks version of The Thing from Another World. In fact, because Howard Hughes owned RKO at the time, airplanes always got a lot of, you'll pardon the expression, face time, because Hughes, was in the plane business, in the aircraft business, the airline business.
And of course, Richard Attenborough would assemble a ton of Dakotas the following year when he made A Bridge Too Far.
Again, one of the things that's great about movies from this time period when they were doing historical pictures was the equipment still existed. For example, Band of Brothers, which is made in the early part of the 21st century, most of the planes in the D-Day drop sequence, and in the other sequence as well, are all digital.
Right.
Because the equipment, the volume of the equipment is not available. So, again, part of the charm of seeing these older movies is that pretty much everything that you see on the screen had to be in front of a lens. And that's, for me, a great deal of the charm of older pictures, where a digital solution was impossible. So they had to really figure it out.
We're still in that period of the epic war film, even though it's kind of winding down. Of course, Bridge Too Far would be released the following year. Midway came out the same year. This was a period when, here we are doing this commentary at a time when COVID has restricted people from going to theaters in many cases. And these were the days when we reveled at going to the theater to see a big epic movie. And these World War II movies were so popular. And I once studied this, and I remember reading that, World War II was the most dramatically intense war in history, with the fate of the planet literally at stake. And I think that Hollywood has always used those stakes to make some of the great films, and they continue today. I mean, obviously, we still see World War II movies. And I think that none of the other wars that we fought in have ever had the level of drama that these World War II movies have. The stakes were intense. And
well, the other thing is that there was a certain amount of clarity, that you knew who the good guys were, you knew who the bad guys are, which again goes back to sort of the trick of this picture where, the protagonists, who are technically not the good guys, who are actually not the good guys, are still the protagonists. And for a movie like this to succeed, you sort of have to be on their side. It's like when you see a heist movie. You're on the side of the guys who are stealing and breaking into, the armored cars, into the big safes, et cetera, the jewelry stores. But still, they are essentially, in societal terms, the bad guys. By the way, Jenny Agutter is so attractive. She has little or no makeup. Her hair is not really coiffed. She doesn't look like she's from an MGM movie in the 1950s. And I kind of like that. I kind of like the fact that she is a very simple, plain country girl, but she does have a certain level of beauty. And I think Sutherland's tenderness here with her also kind of finds a way to put you on Sutherland's side as a character.
Getting back to the protagonist-antagonist thing, the fact that the German Fallschirmjäger try to save that Polish girl at the beginning, and then, of course, get involved in rescuing another girl, I think was Mankiewicz being very, very aware of the fact that you had to make them somewhat sympathetic to really believe in them. If these guys had been SS, murdering Nazis, I don't think it would have worked.
The movie wouldn't work.
No.
And the thing is, I read somewhere, it's not important for you to be sympathetic to a character, but you need to be empathetic. Meaning that you understand what they're doing and you're kind of with them as they go about what they do. In fact, the thing about this film is we know the outcome. we know that the Germans failed. So it's not, it doesn't take on the mystery movie format of the whodunit, but it takes on the format of something that I would call a howdunit. And this is what a lot of these men on a mission movies are. How are they going to succeed? What do they have to do to, take out the guns of Navarone? What do they have to do to capture Hitler? What do they have to do to sort of break into the impenetrable castle of the Eagles and where Eagles dare and get the information that they need and rescue this American general? Again, this whole sequence is much longer in the book. The training part of this story in the novel has a lot more detail. In fact, the pilot who flies the transport I think he has one line or two lines of dialogue in the film, but he is sort of a mini subplot character in the novel. And all of it is really pretty interesting. But again, to give Mankiewicz some more props and Sturges, they streamlined the story and they realized what was the most important thing. It was the machinations or the mechanics of this story. Again, Steiner and Radl come across as much more sympathetic as soldiers. It's almost as if they're not German soldiers, but they are soldiers who we can admire on some level. Once again, I think the thing that Sturges does so well in this and so many other scenes in the villages, this village is kind of made up of a couple of villages, as I recall. It's shot in Oxfordshire, and this town does not exist. But what Sturges so credibly does is by the use of the locations, which of course, look at this shot here with all that great texture and the way it's lit. You sort of see these, gnats or whatever they are, going about their business. I mean, it couldn't be more sort of almost, it could be a period romance, frankly, as opposed to a war film. And again, deep focus. You see all of that texture in the right side of the frame, the house in the background, the gravestones. This is a real place. This is not Hollywood. This is not California. This is really England. And
what was also
very effective.
What was also interesting for me is how neat everything is. I mean, it's almost like there was somebody there in the greens department using a little nail scissors to clip away everything to make sure everything is perfectly neat. And these picture postcard English villages in the countryside were like that. You don't see trash on the street. You don't see, wrecked buildings. I mean, this is World War II from an entirely different point of view. And I really liked the fact that everything was so much in order. And then, of course, Steiner arrives with his paratroopers and all hell breaks loose.
I agree, but it goes to the nature of the way the world was kind of constructed in those days. I mean, I think people had respect for their environment. The other thing that I like about this fight is it's not a fight; it's a beating. Where Devlin clearly is a talented boxer, and the only thing that this guy has is a lot of muscle. And that one last bit, the knee to the jaw, was a piece of savagery and punishment. And again, not an action sequence. It's a character sequence that tells you something about who Devlin is. And of course, the beating that Arthur Seymour takes here is something that gets paid off later on in the story. Seymour had a little bit more to do in the book. Now, this whole sequence here where these vehicles, these British military vehicles, are brought to Devlin's, I guess it's a cottage. It's not even really a farm, although there is a barn there. There is a huge subplot in the book where, Devlin has to go outside of Studley Constable to get, vehicles and petrol and stuff to help move the plot along. And basically these guys are black marketeers who he pays off for providing the equipment and the vehicles. Was a whole subplot. In point of fact, special branch becomes involved in this whole story. It's not uninteresting, but I was not surprised that it was dropped. Again, this is the pilot who, in the book, Garika, I think his name is, has a much bigger part, especially with once he's dropped the paratroopers in England, he has to fly a British plane back to German-occupied territory. And he has to deal with night fighters that shoot him down. So again, the distance from the idea of the story and the mission to the point where Steiner and his men are dropped into England occupies a tremendous amount of the book.
I wonder if, for convenience sake, whether they made it a day drop, although it didn't seem...
Oh, absolutely, yeah. In the book, it was a night drop, but a drop is a drop is a drop.
Good point.
Well, and also we actually do get footage of them, of the parachutists making the drop, and ultimately, in the book, one of the things that they did was they didn't even make a big deal out of it. They were just there. This whole sequence here is not in the book. Considering the book goes into such great detail about so many things, this part of the story was not really much of the story in the novel. And again, there's just something sort of really exciting watching these men jump out of a perfectly good airplane. That's always been what people say is, I don't understand why anybody would want to jump out of a perfectly good airplane. But the paratroops were an effective part of the fighting force on all sides in Europe. And, you know, again, also what this does is it gives Steiner and his men kind of an exciting entrance, and it also sort of signals that we are now in England, and again, the story is going to escalate.
Absolutely.
Now, there's also one other character in the book that I'll bring up. In a sense, it's sort of interesting to me, so I'll bring it up, but it's not necessary to watching the movie. There was a character who's part of Steiner's unit named Preston. And Preston was a British trader who was a member of the British Free Corps, who were involved with the SS and the Germans. They were Brits who, I guess for some reason, had an issue with the Allies and England in particular. And they figured that the Germans were, you know, they were the guys to, you know, they were going to be the victors. And I think this scene with Arthur Seymour is not in the American version, but I could be wrong. But anyway, Preston is a character who is sort of within the group of the paratroopers. He is kind of an antagonist to the protagonists, who are also, depending upon who you think the heroes are in this, but he's a complication. And I think that Sturges and Mankiewicz made a good choice to eliminate him from this story. There are enough pieces to this story that he was not really necessary.
You can both.
By the way, if you recognize the voice, that is not that actor's voice. That is the voice of Brian Blessed doing revoicing this actor, who I believe his name is Tony Curran, I think it is. Again, Molly falls in love, and that turns her into a killer. And, you know, even in the book, the character in the movie and the character in the book is not that different. And again, it's a little tough to be on her side, considering, but it is to the credit of the movie that they at least make her empathetic. Those are real guys jumping out of the plane, not dummies.
Yeah, I noticed that. That was kind of interesting. Today, everything's digital.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean it's not effective, but take a look at where that chute comes out. And I think a lot of those guys actually did a low-level drop. And then, of course, what happens? They get wet for their trouble. And I, again, one of the things that I really admire about this movie is those are real guys, real stuntmen, real parachutists taking a chance by dropping into that water. I mean, they have all that equipment on them. One of the problems with the D-Day landings is that our troops were let out quite a ways away from the beach. And a lot of them would drown under the weight of their equipment. And I really like the fact that Sturges chose to show them dropping in and to really appreciate what they did. If they had done it at night, which would have been more logical, we probably couldn't have seen it. So, hats off to Sturges for making that choice.
That's too bad this was his last film. I think he still had a couple of good more films in him, but that's what it is.
Yeah, and I guess maybe now is time to talk about some disappointment. Mankiewicz had said Sturges, for some reason, had given up and did a poor job, and that editor Ann V. Coates was the one who saved the movie and made it watchable. He still designed the shots. He still directed the actors. He still staged things. Ann Coates, who was one of the best British editors, did a great job cutting this picture. But I think that that's kind of not giving Sturges some of the credit I think he deserves for his storytelling and his craft. Now,
also his casting. I have no doubt that he was intimately involved in every aspect of the casting. And what did they once say, or they often say, is that once you cast, you've done 95% of your work. And I would say that Sturgis's casts were always stellar.
Yeah. Now, apparently Richard Harris was in line to play Devlin, but Harris was very vocal in his support for the IRA, and that drew threats to the producers. So what happened was Harris had to withdraw from the movie, and Sutherland was given the role. And I think Harris would have done a great job, but I like Sutherland in this part. Now, this scene here, I believe, was not in the American version. And I think, again, where this movie decides to be a little longer and a little bit more detailed, it's successful. Again, look at how long Sturges is holding this shot. And again, it gives you time to soak up the room, to really kind of look at everything, and allowing the two great actors to perform. It's almost like a form of theater. You notice that we haven't cut yet. And I think that that's great. In today's movies, I think some directors would not have the confidence to let a scene play out. Now, they've moved the camera a little bit, which gives the scene a little bit more of a different visual perspective, especially with Pleasence in the foreground and more dominant in the frame, because at that point in that scene, he's more dominant. But just kind of getting back to casting a little bit, apparently David Bowie was supposed to be in the picture, but they couldn't work out the schedule. I'm not quite sure who he would have played. I've never read anything about that. Deborah Carr, the great Deborah Carr, was originally supposed to play Mrs. Gray, and it probably would have been closer to the Mrs. Gray in the book. But as I already said, I like Jean Marsh in this part. I remember reading someplace that people thought Michael Caine was badly miscast as Steiner. I have no problem with Caine in this at all. I think he's wonderful.
Well, I would go so far as to say that he makes the movie, because if you don't sympathize with Caine, you're not gonna follow this at all.
Yeah, Caine also felt that the movie was a disappointment, or at least said the movie disappointed him. And he said that Sturges was not really interested in making the movie, and once again, he failed to cut it. But also, Caine had talked about the whole idea that once the movie was finished, Sturges just took the money and went. Jack Weiner, who was one of the producers, told Caine later that Sturges never came back for the editing nor for any of the post-production sessions. And, as a guy who's made a couple of documentaries, there's so much you can do in post with sound editing, sound effects, scoring, of course. and Caine went on to say the picture wasn't bad, but I still get angry when I think of what could have been with the right director. We had committed the old European sin of being impressed by someone just because he came from Hollywood. Well, again, I don't want to be a Sturges defender in this, although I don't think Sturges deserves this. Sturges did a great job shooting this picture. If he wasn't involved with post, he gave Ann Coates great stuff to work with, and the quality of the sound, especially in the battle stuff coming up, the sound effects were very fresh. They didn't sound very stock to me. One of the things that was interesting in the 70s, sound was becoming a much more important component in motion pictures. And I think all of the weapons effects and some of the explosions and everything like that didn't sound like they came from a shelf somewhere in a sound studio saying, all right, we need an M1, we need a machine gun, we need a Tommy gun, in this case, a Sten gun. And to me, that sort of brought a certain level of freshness, to the quality of the picture, and that was all because of post. Here comes Treat Williams, which has a nice entrance, and his name is Captain Harry Clark in the film, but in the book, his name is Captain Harry Caine. There are a number of characters who've had their names changed, and when we get to the Caine's commanding officer, I'll reveal what that name was.
And I discovered, and I didn't know this, that Treat was his middle name. His real name was Richard Treat Williams, and of course he became Treat Williams and will always be Treat Williams for us. He's a Connecticut native. His mother dealt in antiques, and his father was a corporate executive. And I've always liked Treat. I of course, 3 years later, he's rather funny in 1941.
It's very funny in 1941.
I wonder if he likes the movie as much today as we've all liked it over the years. He's a bit of a well, we won't get into it, but he does put upon.
He's a prick.
With a capital P, exactly.
But I want to get back to your concept about how well cast the movie is, and what Sturges brought with his choices. The thing that I liked about Clark in this film is he's young. Most of the time when we see war movies, everybody in the picture is too old. Most combat soldiers were in their teens and in their 20s, and one of the things that's nice about Treat is that he has sort of a natural boyishness, and he's a captain, and you go, okay, he's pretty good so far as being a ranger because he's risen through the ranks. But even though that might seem like, why is this kid a captain? This was more common in reality than not. And
Treat is 24 when he made this, so you're right. He's right in that breadbasket of young soldiers.
The breadbasket of actual reality. That's the thing that's so nice about that. And again, it was a great choice. I mean, you could have cast a guy who was 35 in this part, and in terms of movie reality, that would have been acceptable. But again, Treat is he's so American. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. And of course, here comes Larry Hagman. Doing nothing. He's doing nothing, and he's overacting. And this
Talk about chewing the scenery and spitting it out.
Oh boy. Now, well, slapping himself just for starters. But what's interesting is that when I saw the movie for the first time, I said there wasn't a guy named Clarence E. Pitts in the novel, and in point of fact, this character was a colonel named Shafto, which is definitely an unusual name. But this character in the book is kind of a mini Patton. He had seen combat. He was vainglorious. He had a pearl-handled pistol, not unlike Patton. And Higgins wrote the guy as a bit over the top and outrageous. And then again, because this is an international production, Larry Hagman was known in the States, And I'm sure Hagman said, oh, I get a paid vacation to England for a week or two. I can't believe his part really took more than a couple of weeks to shoot. He said yes, but again, he is known to American audiences. But if the movie has a sort of weak link, and I think you'll probably agree, it's Larry Hagman.
Yeah, he's kind of in a different movie.
Absolutely.
And of course, Larry Hagman, well known for television work, certainly coming to American audiences for the first time pretty much in I Dream of Jeannie. And then, of course, he became, totally associated with the Dallas TV series.
Kind of world famous as
world famous. I mean, J.R. Ewing, you can't get any bigger in television than J.R. Ewing. And it's funny, all the photos you see of Larry Hagman, he has that big cowboy hat on. So it's kind of interesting. Not really well known for his film work, but, he certainly had his name value, which helped the cast.
Well, the other thing that was nice about the scene that preceded this, where all the so-called Polish troops were, running down the road and training. One of the things that's very, very clever about what Sturges did with that, and again, in the book, you didn't quite have this sequence where you have the unity of all these characters. But what Sturges does in some of these training scenes is he is laying out the geography of the village before the battle, the upcoming battle sequence. He's saying, well, this is what we're dealing with. This is where we're dealing with it. And again, all of this stuff goes to great storytelling. And this whole sequence where the kids by the mill wheel here, and we'll see what happens to the kids in a couple of minutes. This is just canny directing. I just feel that while Mankiewicz and perhaps Caine and who knows who else in the cast felt this way, I'm not looking at a guy, at the end of the road. I'm not looking at a guy who has lost his chops as a director. I actually think that this film is as well directed as many of Sturges' other films. Now, Sturges, of course, really went to the A-list as a director with Bad Day at Black Rock, the great Spencer Tracy movie where he goes to this desolate California town to get to the bottom of a mystery. And that movie really made Sturges an A-list guy, but also Sturges primarily was doing Westerns in the 50s.
Right, and directed one of my favorites, The Gunfight at the OK Corral. And then he's credited, of course, with making Steve McQueen a star, first casting him in Never So Few opposite Frank Sinatra and Richard Johnson, and then putting him in that classic grouping, The Magnificent Seven, and then The Great Escape. Like we said, Sturges cast very carefully. And
he had the eye.
He had the eye, and his sense of geography, his sense of movement. It's funny. You and I have seen a million action sequences, and you and I know when they're well directed. And I think that in this movie, the action sequences are very believable and very well directed.
Yeah, I mean, Sturges has proven time and time again. I mean, I recently saw a picture he did called Escape from Fort Bravo with William Holden, which is an offbeat, interesting cavalry picture. And Sturges' sense of space and place was on display, and that was an early feature for him. And then, through the decade, he did a lot of Westerns. He did Last Train from Gun Hill, which also, uses the space of a town in a great way. Magnificent Seven again, Mexican Village, Great Escape, Germany. And this whole sequence coming up here with the kids, this is really pretty much what was in the book. And this is the one thing that spoiled the plan. And again, you brought it up earlier, but the whole idea is these guys they have their mission, they have their orders, they are dedicated to their cause, but somehow they're kind of human and they just don't want to see children be collateral damage in this plot. Again, this is such a great sequence, and immediately the German, dives in there to save the little girl.
apparently they added that wheel. I don't think that wheel was part of the actual building.
Right.
Yeah, they added that as a piece of art direction. But yeah, no, this was the
and dangerous stuff.
Right.
Now 2 kids went into the water in the book, and only 1 kid was enough to get the plot going, especially after revealing the German uniform underneath the British camouflage jacket. And this whole bit where the Germans would not go and fight without having their uniforms was again part of the book. And there's that great line where that Laker Armstrong goes, "Oh, bloody foreigners."
Well, the idea, by the way, apparently, of wearing your medals into battle is not uncommon amongst German troops. Americans would.
I mentioned that earlier. Yeah, that again, Germans were very proud of their military heritage. In America, it's like we fight because we have to, at least at the level of the fighting man. This whole sequence here is really kind of telescoped, I think, rather efficiently. With Pamela Verica here discovers Molly, and Molly admits to what is going on. This is not quite the way Higgins laid it out. Again, this is Sturges and Tom Mankiewicz. And by the way, it was nice to see Judy Geeson in a uniform, but it's also nice to see her in a more traditional British peaches and cream kind of look. I mean, I always liked her, and I think maybe my favorite movie that she's in, besides this, is that she's John Wayne's co-star in Brannigan, where he plays this tough Chicago cop who has to go to London in pursuit of a criminal, and she is his assistant, and she has this thing about the Yanks. It's like they're oversexed and over here. I think she has this line because Brannigan mentions that he had fought and was stationed in England. But
I actually discovered her in the Sidney Poitier film To Sir with Love.
Yeah, I think that really kind of got the career going for her. She had been in a number of suspense movies. She's done some horror movies. She was very busy for, it seemed like, about 15 years or so. And, when the British film business was busier than it was, sort of somewhere in the mid-70s, right around the time this picture was made, England was really the home of these international co-productions. And then, of course, people like George Lucas and Ridley Scott, they came to England and take advantage of the craftsmen and the studios. But British movies that were originated in England were become fewer and fewer because of the economics. But this whole sequence here, I like Verica's outrage at what that Caine and his men are doing. And again, it's interesting. He's just really, he's a father, and he is the father of this village, and not having the military background in it, I think works. I have no problem with it.
I had no idea how well thought of John Standing was. I mean, he comes from a very respected English acting family, going all the way back to his great-grandfather, who was an actor in the 1800s. He's a Sir, by the way. It's Sir John Standing. He was knighted. Started his life out as a painter, interestingly enough, before he became an actor.
Wow. I remember I was sort of very pleased once. I was watching an episode of NYPD Blue, and he was playing a British detective. And, one of the things that John Standing does, like so many British actors of the time, is he speaks well. A lot of British actors, classically trained British actors, would say, first thing you have to learn how to do is talk or speak. And, he's very commanding. He's got a wonderful voice. And again, to your earlier point about, getting the casting right, Robert Altman used to say, at least in interviews that I read back in the day, well, 90% of my job is to get the casting right.
Because if it's not right, you begin to have problems, of course, and lack of chemistry, just traumatic problems. But this movie, now that we're in high gear, now that we're about to set the stakes for this small unit of German Fallschirmjäger defending this village, I think we're into it now, and I think this is great setup.
Yeah, and the thing is that maybe it's because of all those years of watching the old combat TV series. My favorite battle sequences are small arms battle sequences for the most part. You know, watching cannons literally blow apart the countryside and just, you know, making a mess of the real estate and the vehicles and the men. It's exciting, to be sure, but ultimately at the end of the day, the more intimate kind of battle scenes, the likes of which we're going to be seeing pretty soon, are always kind of my favorites. And again, we've said this, but we'll say it again, Sturges was kind of outstanding. This sequence here, it's the audience is ahead of Pamela, and they know that Mrs. Gray is up to no good. And this sequence is not the same as the sequence in the book, although for the most part, what happens in this scene is not what they did in the book. You know, Mrs. Gray does not go and grab this pistol and shoot it at Judy Geeson. Also, just for you firearms fans, in the book, Mrs. Gray is using a Walther as opposed to a Colt. You know, since she works for the Germans, she had a German firearm, but that's the Colt is a handgun that was used by the British as well as American police officers before and after the war. Again, one of the things that's interesting here, and it's sort of subtle, is that you notice that a lot of the scenes have a lot of cutting. That Ann Coates, the director, is upping the pace of the movie with the cutting. And Sturges came from the editing room. And I think in the shooting and the staging, he understood what the cutting was going to be like. But think of this scene compared to that scene in Himmler's office that I was talking about earlier, where it was all one long take. And there was a subtle camera move, and then there was a change of position where Himmler became dominant in the frame. And here, Molly and Liam Devlin here are kind of been equals in the frame. In essence, even though they are separated in the cutting, they are a couple. They are a pair. And, you know, I kind of like the romantic nature of their relationship. Again, it came under a lot of, you know, it got a lot of flack back in the day. But sometimes movies age really well. And I don't know about you, Steve, but I think this picture has aged really well. Beautiful long shot, by the way, establishing the terrain for the upcoming battle.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think in re-seeing this movie and revisiting these characters, I enjoyed it a lot more this time. I appreciate it for what it is. And I think I appreciate the performances much more now.
Now, did you like it when you first saw it? I remember when I first saw it, I saw it, you know, in New York on Broadway with an audience. And I felt the audience was going with it, and I really enjoyed it. Now, granted, I read the book. I knew what I was getting into. But so many times you read a novel and then you see a movie and it stinks. And I think in the case of The Eagle Has Landed, they did a great job of adapting the book. And also, it should be pointed out, but no surprise, this movie is what is known in the home video business as an evergreen. This Blu-ray that hopefully you've watched a couple of times before you listen to our commentary is something that has come out time and time again through the various iterations of home video. This is a popular movie. And what's interesting is I'm not surprised that it would be popular with people from the greatest generation. Like my dad liked this picture a lot, but it continues to be popular. It's sort of popular with the baby boomers, you know, the baby boomers who saw this movie probably with their dad. or with somebody who had served in the war. This picture just endures, and it doesn't endure because it's mediocre. It doesn't endure because it's apathetically directed, which it's not. It endures because it's a great story, really, really well told. I mean, I love the fact that Jean Marsh is camera left, and you get to see all that sort of charming perfection of this little English village. It's sort of perfect, you know?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
All right, well, now, good things and strange things are about to start happening.
Oh God, I can't say enough about how I can't stand Larry Hagman's performance in this movie. But you know, it doesn't hurt the movie that much, and it does add some added drama to this. Although, as you point out, it was nothing like this in the book.
Well, yes and no. Shafto, as he was called in the book,
Shafto.
It's an interesting name to say the least.
That's Churchill's personal motto. You know,
was a version of Clarence E. Pitts here. He was very gung-ho, but he was gung-ho because he believed that, you know, the whole thing where Churchill says, "action this day," is a line in the book which Mankiewicz brought over to the screenplay. But for some reason, you know, Larry Hagman was, if he wasn't directed to be comic, he just played it in this comic way. And Shafto was a more serious, but not incredibly competent leader. And what happens is, as Clark, or Caine as he's called in the book, is off to intercept Churchill and foil the plot, you know, Pitts here feels that if he goes into action and he stops Steiner and his men, that might help him from being transferred back to Fort Benning, Georgia, you know, some sort of either desk job or training job. And
that was Jeff Conaway there as his lieutenant.
Yes, correct? It was. Yes, it was.
About a year away from playing Kaniki in Greece.
And then, of course, you know, Jeff Conaway eventually probably became most famous for being on the TV series Taxi.
Correct.
You know, but again, the thing that, to Larry Hagman's credit, he just shows how, you just realize how incompetent this guy is. That he is not a guy that you want to follow into battle. I thought this, you know, it could have been a stunt that went wrong there with all those vehicles skidding to a halt. But again, a great piece of storytelling, a subtle look at Churchill.
And by the way, I completely believe that was Churchill.
Yeah. You have to believe it. If you don't believe it's Churchill, then the whole plot kind of falls apart. You know, it's one of those things where you have to believe what you're seeing is real. Once again, I love the way Sturges is using the Panavision screen to give you plenty of real estate, and I keep harping on that because what happens is Sturges makes directing look easy, especially in the battle scenes. And it's because he's done the work ahead by letting the audience know what this village looks like. And I think it's part of why this movie is so effective.
You know, it's interesting concerning the controversy of John not being involved in post. Given that he came from an editor's background, and given that he shot all this footage, my sense is that whereas some directors hand over a film and it's not really exactly what Ann Coates would need, my sense is that Sturges gave her the coverage she needed.
Well, didn't Sturges come from the editing room?
Yeah, he was an editor, absolutely.
Yeah, so the thing is, a lot of editors make great directors, and I'm sure that Sturges, to one degree or another, especially after all the years and all the film and all the movies he had made before this, he knew what he needed. I don't think that he wasted a lot of time by getting a tremendous amount of additional coverage.
Right.
Again, this scene It's played a little bit more comically for laughs, especially when the German soldier comes out and all he's saying is yes,
Yes.
yes, yes. You know, again, it doesn't bother me too much because the rest of what's going on around it is so good and so credible. You know, the other thing that I wanted to mention, since we got a little taste of Churchill before, is Churchill is what would be known as the MacGuffin in an Alfred Hitchcock movie.
Right.
The MacGuffin is that mysterious thing that sort of sets everything out into motion. And again, if you didn't believe that that was Churchill, well, then the movie would really, really fall apart. And, you know, I had read someone talked about this picture and they called it a tragedy, you know, and they felt that the character's flaws ultimately brought about the demise. And, you know, they mentioned that Steiner and his men fail because they're too nice. I don't know if I would call them nice, but at least they're human. If, you know, again, if they hadn't saved the local girl, their mission might have been a success. They might have successfully been able to kidnap Churchill without any problem. So in a sense, because of that, the sort of tragedy aspect of the picture, it's why the story ultimately kind of works.
Oh,
you know, it's like, when you see a heist movie, and by the time the heist is over, all of the guys who came up with that great plan to steal the jewels or steal the money and rob the armored car, they always get caught or killed. And that's what makes those movies, again, very effective on a human level. And Jeff Conaway, to his credit, is basically questioning Pitt's assault plan. But again, it's great to watch the movie from this point on, because we're just in the hands of a master action director. And again, the sort of the not the tactics of the Americans, but the way that Steiner has sort of set his men up is very effective from a tactics standpoint. I personally hate seeing our guys get killed, but it's just the nature of the story. I'm not rooting for Steiner, but this goes to the whole kind of craziness of war. I mean, you want everybody to survive. You hate to see young guys get killed. And what's nice is that most of these young guys, you know, represent a certain authenticity about the age of combat soldiers.
Right. And they're using these carbines with the longer clip, which I thought was interesting. You never saw Lieutenant Hanley with that longer clip in combat.
Yeah, the clips or the magazines that the paratroopers have, they're known as banana clips because of the curve.
Right.
And there are places in the movie where the carbines are full auto, which I don't know that in World War II carbines could go full auto.
No.
It was mostly, I think, in Korea where the M1 carbines could ultimately, fire auto. Again, I hated seeing our guys get shot up, but again, this is an exciting and well-staged battle sequence. This whole thing here, by the way, where they blow up their truck, this was not something that was in the book. And in the movie, they refer to the bazooka shell as I believe they call it a missile, when in point of fact, what it was a rocket.
Right.
That a missile, the difference between one and the other is, based on something I read, was saying that a missile is controlled by someone or something else, whereas the rocket is fired by the bazooka man. A lot of blood in this picture, too. I mean, we're in the 1970s, so unlike a lot of World War II era movies, movies made during World War II, when guys get shot, they bleed. And I think the blood in many instances here is very convincing.
Very true. Very true.
I also like the fact that, you get to see those sort of tubes, which, the rockets would be carried in. From an equipment standpoint, one of the things I like about this picture so much is all the equipment seems to be pretty authentic and accurate for the period, which unfortunately with some films, I also like the fact that you see the bazooka man when he's loading is attaching the wires, which it gets a charge, and the charge ignites the rocket and the rocket fires. Again, for all, we're World War II movie guys, and the equipment and the gear is an important component, especially in terms of the credibility of the storytelling.
Always kind of surprised me that in the story that they didn't send Churchill back to London. He's still kind of hanging around. I would think that.
Well,
yeah.
This village is kind of in the middle of nowhere, and they say, well, let's take him to the most secure place in town.
Right.
I mean, there are 30, 40 Rangers there to protect him.
That is true. That is true.
Will you put me through to
Now,
getting back to those carbines, I remember interviewing Guy Gabaldon, who of course was the subject of the great war movie Held to Eternity, about the Battle of Saipan, and he told me that the M1 carbine was the worst weapon he ever carried because it had no stopping power, especially during Japanese Japanese banzai attacks.
Really?
He'd have to pump, he said he'd have to pump like 6 or 7 rounds into a guy to bring him down.
Now, I've fired a carbine on a couple of occasions, and I can understand why certain guys like to carry them because they're light.
Right.
Even though it's made of wood and steel and stuff like that, it's lighter than an M1, which I've also fired. Certainly lighter than a Thompson, and certainly lighter than a BAR. But, even though it's a 30 caliber round, it's interesting that they didn't have much stopping power.
That's what he told me. And I think because Guy was a little guy, he was only 5'3 3/4. I think carrying the carbine was better for him because he didn't want to lug around that very heavy M1.
M1 was very heavy, and German weapons were heavy as well. I fired a German Mauser rifle, none of which we're seeing in this picture, but they were heavy. If you watched, combat every week, like we all did, those guys are lugging around, the M1s and the Mauser bolt-action rifles. That stuff is heavy. I understand why he wanted to carry the carbine. Now, this is a moment. One, it's kind of stupid, but again, great blood work there. I remember someone in the audience actually cheered when Larry Hagman got shot in the head.
Yeah. Of course, we do get our revenge on dear sweet Joanna.
Yeah. Well, again, here's where the carbine at full auto is on display. Again, this is the part of the movie where all of a sudden the players are starting to go, and we've gotten to know them for an hour and 40 some odd minutes, and you sort of feel bad to see them go. Again, Lalo Schifrin's score for this movie, where it's I think a little understated, but one of the things that it does very well is it propels the action as necessary and quiet as necessary. One of the things that's great about watching older movies, especially if you're a film music fan, is that when I was growing up, when you were growing up, Steve, there were so many great composers, and Schifrin, by the 70s, had already established himself. I mean, he became famous for Mission Impossible, and he had also scored some The Man from U.N.C.L.E. in season 2. He had done a lot of television work, but Mission Impossible is what he was primarily famous for. And then he kind of became the suspense guy, or one of the suspense guys, when it came to doing features. And I think he did a really, really nice job. I was a little surprised, frankly. Great stunt. Hopefully the driver was okay. I mean, that was real. That was dangerous.
That was quite a stunt.
It was a great stunt. It was not only a car flip, but there was a lot of, pyro work. That stuff is dangerous, even though things most of the time are handled with an extreme focus on safety. When you see a stunt like that, I always wonder if somebody got hurt. But getting back to Schifrin for a second, one of the things that was so great about movies in this time period is there were so many talented composers. And frankly, I was a little surprised that a British composer did not score this picture. Somebody like Roy Budd, who had worked with Caine, who was a bit more modern. John Barry, who probably was doing more American-type movies at the time. He was still doing Bond, of course. And then Ron Goodwin, who was a guy who composed music for so many World War II pictures. He did the music for Where Eagles Dare, The Battle of Britain. He was a guy of 633 Squadron, which he is really famous for.
Didn't he also do A Bridge Too Far?
No, that was John Addison, but
John Addison.
kind of with a Ron Goodwin sort of flavor. And you know, John Addison is another British composer who could have done this picture. So it's interesting that they went with Schifrin because they wanted, you know, his ability to, you know, create suspense, which he was great at. He really, really was. I think primarily that was his real claim to fame. Although another movie he did around this time, again, a European production, he worked for the Salkinds and did the score for The Four Musketeers, which is a score that I like quite well as well. Part two of the battle, and fun and games, and I say that in quotes, is now over, and the real pros are showing up. And again, one of the things that I like about this is that you get to see soldiers confronting soldiers. And there's a line that's coming up from Treat Williams that's great, which is not in the book. You know, he says, "There's no such thing as death with honor, just death." And
You had better join your flock.
it's one opponent talking to the other. You know, from the American point of view, Steiner is the enemy. But to his credit, partly because he wants to save the parishioners, he's allowing Steiner to surrender with a certain amount of dignity and a certain amount of respect. It's a really nice scene, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And this, you know, notice when Larry Hagman came to the door, they send out the comic relief, but now it's serious. Steiner and you know, Clark.
Steiner has a line. I don't remember exactly what the line is, but Steiner has recognized that this officer knows his business. I think that is the line, as a matter of fact. And it takes a real soldier to recognize the ability of a real soldier.
I have hostages.
I love Caine in this picture. This is one of my favorite films of his.
Yeah.
I think partly because it's sort of almost a character part. You know, clearly he's the star. Clearly he is the lead antagonist, but he's not Harry Palmer. He's not Alfie. He's not cruising off his natural British charm. He's bringing a little something different to it. There's really good.
There's a certain panache about him. You know, this is the panache side of Caine. We'll see a little bit of it about the same period in The Man Who Would Be King.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was a little like that in, was it Play Dirty?
Play Dirty is an interesting oddball movie where, again, he plays a Brit. You know, Play Dirty is very much of an anti kind of war movie. Well, no real war movie is a pro-war movie, but again, this is more of an adventure. Also, the other thing, a smart move in this. There was something in the previous scene with the mother of the child. She said, "I thank you for the life of my child." You know, she says, "I don't understand what you're doing," and I don't. You know, I'm not exactly sure what the line is, but. Once again, reestablishing that these German officers are doomed to fail because of their humanity. And so that kind of keeps you on Steiner's side, even though what happens after that is his men basically are exterminated by these highly competent Rangers.
Such thing as death with honor. Just death.
Yeah, there's that line. There's no such thing as death with honor, just death. But then Caine comes back and he says that basically, let me decide when and where I die. Which is a soldier's prerogative.
What do you think you are doing?
Now, what's interesting for me is, and again, there wouldn't have been as much drama, but Sutherland's character, Liam, tells him about this tunnel.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I couldn't understand was why they couldn't all escape into that tunnel. He leaves behind his men to, I guess, divert, but it seemed to me that they could have all escaped. What do you think?
Well, I think Siegfried Rausch basically answers your question. Siegfried Rausch realizes they still have a chance at getting Churchill. And so Siegfried Rausch, who is, I guess, he's a Hauptmann. Is a Hauptmann a sergeant or a lieutenant? I don't remember.
I think a sergeant.
I think so too. And as we know, sergeants always run the army. But what Siegfried Rausch basically says is that, if we all try, we may fail. But what he wants to do is he wants to allow Hans there to get away because he's wounded. And he wants to allow his officer to have a chance at being successful. Again, it's a version of them deciding, well, this is where we want to make our stand, and this is where we want to die. But again, one of the things that's nice about this scene is, it's about loyalty. That these men have a bond, and this bond of soldiers, regardless of nationality, is something I think the audience can appreciate and relate to.
Right.
I don't see any maniacal zealousness in these soldiers. They're just doing what they have to do, and this is their time. And if they're going to die, they want to die fighting, as opposed to riding torpedoes into Allied shipping.
Correct.
But again, it's a good scene. And I think I watched this once and I tried to count how many lines of dialogue Sven Bertil-Taub had, and I think maybe he's got 5 lines. But again, he's got such a great face, and he's so visually credible that you go, okay, all right, I get it. And this is more or less what happens in the book as well, that Steiner and Devlin and Hans or Ritter in the book. By the way, this whole thing about playing the organ, this is actually in the book. That I don't know if it was playing the organ at this point, but the whole idea of the one soldier playing the organ, and I think Vereker says, he goes, Bach needs to be played well. And I believe that's a line that Mankiewicz, brought over to the screenplay. Again, this sequence is, a little bit, it's got a lot more cutting, but again, you see how incredibly competent as warriors the Rangers are. Now, in the book, I don't think this climactic action sequence is as well done in the book as it's done in the film.
Now they're employing a lot of superior firepower. Having that half track with that 50,
that's a 50. It's a 50 caliber.
Yeah, 50 cal just completely changed the stakes of the battle.
I like to see guys changing the magazines during the battle. Again, the attention to detail for the stuff with the Rangers is great. Now, that Ranger has a grease gun, and the grease gun was becoming popular for a couple of reasons. The grease gun was kind of based on the British Sten gun. It had no wood. It was lighter. It had fewer parts. It was inexpensive to make compared to a Thompson. I think I read once somewhere that a Thompson cost over $100 to produce. And that's $100 in 1940s dollars. So what happened in the mid part of the war or prior to D-Day, the grease gun was being manufactured and distributed and saving money, in terms of the manufacturing costs. I don't know how reliable a weapon it was, but I'm sure it got the job done on some level. I was always amazed at the level of those explosions Because that's a real church. That's not a set. You know, they go up, they drop the grenades in there, and there you see them below. So again, the special effects guy, you know, had these giant air rams of some kind, you know, blowing through the windows and blowing debris and parts through the windows. And I'm surprised they didn't try and do it as an insert on a set.
It's kind of one of the few times in watching World War II movies with Germans and Americans that you feel a little bit of sympathy for the Germans.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the major tricks that this movie pulls off, is that you're not on their side, but you have some, again, empathy for them.
Absolutely.
Now, as you know, we'll get into it a little further on, but I do want to, you know, give you some idea, the critical response for this picture. I will say that according to Lou Grade, film was a success, and quote, it made quite a lot of money. And The Eagles Landed did spend a week as the #1 film in the UK. That was the 9th of April, 1977, and was the 15th most successful film of 1977. And what's interesting to me is that this movie, you'll pardon the expression, was kind of bulletproof as far as the critics were concerned. That I did some research and I found a number of reviews, and I won't give you the sense of all of them, but Gene Siskel, who in America was probably one of the 2 or 3 most influential critics because of his weekly show with Roger Ebert. But Siskel was also a critic for the Chicago not the Chicago Sun-Times, the Chicago Tribune, gave the movie 1.5 stars. Rex Reed, who was sort of a famous critic in New York, I don't know who he wrote for, I read his review, had very little use for the picture. The New York Daily News gave it 2.5 stars, mostly because of the cast. The Daily News critic felt that the movie had a great cast. Well, what a surprise. We've been talking about it for the last 2 hours. In Los Angeles, the LA Times critic, Kevin Thomas, who usually reviewed second-tier or genre-type pictures, felt that it landed with a dull thud. And the Boston Globe, just the critic for the Boston Globe, felt it was a stupid movie. All of that said, however, Vincent Canby, who was the first-string critic for the New York Times and a lover of foreign films and art films, but I felt always a fair critic, a very readable critic. He kind of replaced Bosley Crowther, who was their #1 critic back in the day, who seemed to hate everything. Canby said about the movie, it was, quote, a good old-fashioned adventure movie that is so stuffed with robust incidents and characters that you can relax and enjoy it without worrying whether it actually happened or even whether it's plausible.
That kind of sums it up nicely.
Yeah, well, but he goes on, and it's worth saying. He felt that the writing and directing was really quite good, and said Tom Mankiewicz's screenplay, based on a novel by Jack Higgins, is straightforward and efficient and even intentionally funny from time to time. Mr. Sturges obtains first-rate performances, building the tension until the film's climactic sequence, which, as you might suspect, concludes with a plot twist. With so many failed suspense melodramas turning up these days, it's refreshing to see one made by people who know what they are about. Clearly, Steve, he saw the same movie we did.
By the way, I noticed that the release date in the U.S. for this movie was April 2nd, 1977. So it literally had a month of clear sailing until a little film called Star Wars opened.
Wow, that's right. That's right.
So,
and that little film pretty much changed the world, the cinematic world as we know it.
Exactly. That summer I was in Europe. I was backpacking through Europe with a friend of mine, and all we heard about was Star Wars this and Star Wars that. And I remember coming home after 11 weeks. We stopped in Chicago. I went to one of the big movie palaces downtown. I saw Star Wars literally in an empty midweek theater. And I said, what is all this about? And then I came back to LA, saw it on a Saturday night at the Chinese theater with a packed audience. I said, okay, now I get it.
Right. This is a very nice scene for a bunch of reasons, not the least of which is, God, it's pictorial as hell. And Sturges, once again, I've said it already probably more times than I should have, you know, he probably has a motto saying, when you have the room, meaning the location, show it and use it. Again, the little period detail, the radio tower, the sandbags, all of that sort of customized set dressing around that pre-existing stone house. It's all very nice. And it really does say that the Germans are occupying this town.
This whole sequence reminded me a little bit of, in a certain way, to the bridge at Remagen with Robert Vaughn, and how he ends up in the movie. And
doesn't Robert Vaughn actually wear a leather coat, not unlike what Robert Duvall is wearing at the moment?
Yeah, kind of reminded me a little bit of that. Of course, let's see. Bridge of Remagen was 69, so 7 years earlier. I think that these sequences kind of remind me of other sequences, but yeah.
Well, again, part of why I liked reading these types of books, the Higgins books, the McLean books, these historical, as the British call them, boys' own adventures. And I never completely could figure out that phrase, but a lot of the McLean stories, especially something like Where Eagles Dare and When Eight Bells Toll are concerned, they're known as boys' own adventures. And part of it for me as a young boy or a teenager reading these stories was, I knew New York City. That's where I grew up. And these books took me to a time and a place that didn't exist. And I think one of the values of this movie to me today is it's even though this movie was shot in the 70s, even the 70s are kind of deep period right now. And this movie takes you to a time and a place, and some of these locations that we're looking at, maybe not the village, might not exist the way they exist in this picture.
Well, I'll tell you, having been to England within the last 10 years, when you get outside London, there's a kind of a storybook quality about these villages, that they keep many of the same houses. There's not the great development you see in US cities. You don't see a lot of modern architecture. I've been to some amazing little villages in England that look like you stepped out of the 18th century.
Yeah, I mean, England is when you go to London, it's about as urban as it gets. But if you have a chance to go into the countryside, some of the charm that we're seeing in this picture actually still exists. One of the things I wanted to mention about this picture is that ITC, which was basically Lou Grade's studio, which is mostly famous for television, decided to get into the movie game, which in the 70s, a number of companies tried their hand at making movies. And Grade made these pictures, pardon me, in collaboration with the General Cinema Corporation, which is an American exhibitor. And they formed a company called Associated General Films, and they were producing movies, but they weren't distributing them. And some of the other movies they made, pardon me, were Voyage of the Damned, Capricorn 1, which is a great picture, the Peter Hyams movie. ITC also produced Boys from Brazil, The Return of Pink Panther, The Last Unicorn. They were involved with the Muppets. They did The Dark Crystal.
Did they do Raise the Titanic?
Yes, ultimately Raise the Titanic, according to Lou Grade, said he should have lowered the Atlantic. It was interesting. In 79, ITC partnered with another UK company called Thorn EMI, and they created a company called Associated Film Distribution. So they wanted to be a real studio, at least not with the property per se, but they wanted to be a producer and distributor. And ultimately raised the Titanic and I think Can't Stop the Music, which was that Village People musical. Those two movies, which were released within a very short period of one another, pretty much torpedoed the company. And they weren't heard from again. But at least the films that they produced were not lost and continue to appear and reappear, much the way Eagle Has Landed has continued to appear in all various versions of home video. The other thing is that there is, I think, an actual longer version of this picture, which includes a number of different scenes. And again, I like this version of the picture, this length, because it pretty much allows the picture to breathe a little bit. You have more scenes with, well, here he is with Donald Pleasence as Himmler. And the stuff with Molly doesn't seem to be quite as rushed.
Yeah, that's where I really feel that they probably cut short a lot of those sequences between Donald Sutherland and Jenny Agutter, because it just does seem rushed in this cut.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think when Columbia released this picture in America, I think they cut it down with the hopes of maybe getting an extra show in a day.
And there's Wolf Collar, who we know from the Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Wolf Collar, kind of in the 70s and the 80s, became the go-to German.
He became the Carl Otto Alberti when Carl Otto Alberti wasn't.
That's where I was going. It's nice to see you pick that up. But again, I have to say that I feel sorry for Radl. All he did was try and take a crazy idea and do a feasibility study, and then ultimately he's executed for it.
Yeah, in Hitler's army, there was no room for error. That was definitely the case.
Yeah, and look at how powerful that is in long shot. Again, one of the most articulate pieces of cinematic storytelling can be the long shot. And if you don't think I know what I'm talking about, watch this little movie called Lawrence of Arabia.
Exactly.
Ann Coates, based on everything that we've heard, deserves, I think, a little bit more of a shout out. She was highly regarded as an editor, and she worked until about 2015. Her last picture was 50 Shades of Grey, but she cut Erin Brockovich, Out of Sight, In the Line of Fire, Chaplin, movies like What About Bob, Farewell to the King, Masters of the Universe. She cut Raw Deal, the Arnold Schwarzenegger picture, Greystoke, Pirates of Penzance. I mean, on and on. Elephant Man.
Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah, and Murder on the Orient Express. I'm sort of going from current backwards here. On the list, she cut Beckett. She just had this extraordinary career, and I think her standing as an editor was at the highest level in British cinema. And I think she deserves an awful lot of, she deserves a big curtain call here, because this movie is very well cut. Say what they said about Sturges at the time, the movie's very well cut. But, Sturges, prior to this picture, did a John Wayne picture called McHugh, which was basically, I think, a movie where John Wayne was trying to do a form of Dirty Harry. And again, Sturges shot that, and he shot it in Seattle, which is where I believe he was living at the time. And that picture was just as well made as this is. I mean, whether you think it's a good picture or not, Sturges does not, let me see if I get this right, does not know how not to tell a story. He just, it's baked into him.
very few times does he, he fall flat. It's, every director has their bombs, and he's had them, but this definitely was not one of them. And I think he went out on a very strong plus with this.
I think so too, but the craziness is that the critics didn't think so.
Those critics.
Well, yeah, but the thing is that the fans, the audience, ultimately tells you if you did a good job. And this movie, which was made in the mid-'70s, here we are in 2021, this movie is still popular. Now, what's great about this is from the book, and the whole and Lalo Schifrin's suspense music is great in this sequence, where they realize that Steiner is on the grounds, and you go, as an audience, you sort of go, wow, he's finally going to do it, and you don't want him to do it. And then ultimately, when they realize that Steiner's on the grounds and they they run to try and save Churchill,
his Jeep is missing.
Churchill gets shot, and you go, oh my God, they actually killed Churchill, except they didn't. Look at how determined Caine is in that shot.
Oh yeah.
I think this is one of the rare instances where I think they built this as a set. Almost all of the movie seems like it's locations, but that this is a set. And it might have been so that they could do such a nice job lighting it. Anthony Richmond did a great job. And then Steiner is shot and killed. And I felt bad for Steiner getting killed. And in the book, he is killed, except somehow he survives his wounds. And they did a sequel to this picture. That's not to this picture, to the novel.
Oh, really? There's a second novel?
There's a second Steiner novel.
Oh, okay. Who does he kill this time?
I don't really remember. I read that book, and it wasn't overly memorable.
The eagle has landed again.
I don't think this is the title, but it's sort of like the eagle has flown. But don't hold me to that. But here's the thing.
He didn't even call out.
In the book,
played it straight through to the end.
This reveal about this guy being a variety artist, he's not killed in the book. He's killed in the film, but they have an epilogue, again, going back to that thing where Jack Higgins is doing research on this, and he finds out that indeed this guy was a double. Indeed, this guy was a variety artist. But what happens is that he dies on the stage, I believe, during a bomb raid, where, the Germans kill him in a bombing raid. So just to add a little irony on top of irony. Now, the other thing in the book is that Devlin gets on the E-boat with with Hans. Saves me the trouble of mispronouncing his German name. Neustadt, yeah. And basically what happens is
to leave you.
They kind of get away, because this is the first of, I think, 3 stories that were written by Higgins featuring Liam Devlin, which I did not know that Devlin reappeared in later Higgins books. That looks like a matte painting to me, actually, with the E-boat there, stuck with the low tide. And it's a nice little payoff there with Devlin and the dogs.
And then Sturges does something, or I should say Ann Coates does something that Sturges did in The Great Escape, which is show the cast and their characters.
Well, this is what Sidney Lumet would call a curtain call.
Yeah, which I think should be done more in films. I really think, and I think I've said it before, probably in one of our commentaries, that TV series like The Band of Brothers could have really used something like this.
Well, as a guy who's a credits junkie growing up, I always liked these, because then, when you would see the name, you could associate the face. That's interesting that they go out with Donald Pleasence laughing as Himmler. But I think that it's great when the actors can get this like little moment. And I think that this is, I wonder if this is, well, that's a Sturges thing, but I think in England, where they come from a theater tradition where the actors get their curtain call, this just seems natural and appropriate.
Now, did you notice that Siegfried Rausch does not get a curtain call?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, Siegfried Rausch is, I don't even know if he has a credit in the movie. But Siegfried Rausch is on the American one-sheet poster, so I know I'm not crazy. But I don't know if he got a credit. There may have been a contractual issue of some kind. I don't know. That's one of the mysteries of The Eagle Has Landed. Wow, 2 hours and 15 minutes or so went really, really fast, Steve. It was fun to revisit this with you.
Absolutely, Steve. I really enjoy these moments where we can go back and see some of our favorite films.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to share the memories. And again, one of the things that's nice is that they're not in a hurry with the end titles. So you're getting to see some of these names, some of which, like Jerry Crampton, the stunt guy, is a guy who has done so many British films. And thank you, Lord Great, for making this movie. I'm a big fan.
Take care, Steve.
Thanks.